to yet another webinar from MedHQ. MedHQ is a leading provider of advisory and administrative solutions in the healthcare industry. We provide accounting and finance, HR, revenue cycle billing, and staffing services. Today, we are going to talk about a very hot topic, fraud prevention, internal control, and positive pay. We will discuss some of the ways that we have encountered fraud and how we have helped our clients mitigate the risk. Let me begin by introducing myself. I'm Dhara Raval. I'm accounting manager at MedHQ. I've been with MedHQ for over 7 years. I've worked in accounting for over 10 years now. I have with me my colleague and co-presenter, Julie. Julie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Dhara. My name is Julie Rusboldt, and I am an accounting manager in my 14th year here at MedHQ. The two main types of fraud we're seeing here at MedHQ are check fraud and ACH fraud. One technique that is used in check fraud is something called check washing, and that's basically where they take your original check and they wash it with a solution and replace the payee. And basically rewrite it that way. Another technique is check cooking, where they actually take a digital scan of your check and they create their own check using your bank information and your signature, again, to rewrite the check. The main reason for this increase in check fraud is basically there's an increase in mail theft. As an alternative to writing checks, we're seeing an increase in ACH or automated clearinghouse transactions. And basically because of their relatively low risk and affordability. However, with this increase in usage of ACH, we are seeing an uptick in fraud cases. And this is basically accomplished by someone gaining access to your bank account information and making fraudulent transfers. Or it can happen by them maybe making an ACH payment and then claiming later that it was fraudulent and asking for a return or a refund. Definitely not limited to these two types of fraud. This is just kind of what we're seeing here at MedHQ. There's also identity theft, wire fraud, credit card fraud, phishing, and so many more. And, their techniques are just becoming more and more sophisticated and continuing to evolve. So while we can't necessarily stop fraud, we have to take steps to try to minimize it or prevent it. Within an organization, internal controls, just such a powerful tool to protect an organization's interests and their assets. Effective internal controls can help prevent fraud by detecting it early and thus mitigating losses. Dhara is going to demonstrate later in our presentation how MedHQ can help a center set up an accounts payable system by segregating duties, and this definitely will display some internal control methods. There's also authentication and encryption tools. If you look outside of the organization, there's banking tools such as Positive Pay that we'll discuss later in more detail, and insurance services.
All right. Discussing the internal fraud prevention strategy with internal control. This is basically structuring and regulating your day-to-day activities. So one such policy that we have developed is approval of invoices and new vendors. Every time you input an invoice in the system, we want to make sure that it goes through a proper approval channel. An individual, it could be a business office manager, administrator, reviews the invoices, make sure that everything on the invoices looks correct. It's a good, it's a legit service that you have been receiving, or materials that you have been receiving. So we want to make sure that all those details are being checked off, and then we input this invoice in the system. Similarly, for new vendors, we want to make sure that only approved vendors are in the system. So either an administrator, someone from the hospital reviews new vendors. We request a new vendor addition form, which is authorized by either the hospital or the administrator, and only then we put it into the system. The next thing would be developing an AP workflow. What we do is, whenever a new client comes in, we prepare an AP workflow chart. We discuss the whole process, and we decide that for which step who is responsible, and we try to make sure that no two duties are done by the same person. So this way, we are just minimizing the potential for fraud. I'll display a proper workflow little later. um, the next thing would be keeping an inventory of checks and updating the signer on the account. So over here, keeping an inventory, we just want to make sure the checks do not get in the hands of the people who shouldn't have access to it. And then, updating the signer on the account, we want to make sure that as people come and leave the organization, only those individuals, those authorized individuals, have access to it. So these are some checks that we keep in place for internal control, making sure that everything flows correctly. All right, so this is the AP workflow template that we use at MedHQ. As you can see over here, we have divided the whole flow between the three platforms. One is any third-party software that you might be using. The next is anything that's being handled at MedHQ. And then finally, whatever happens in the system, accounting system intact. We're trying to lay out steps to make sure each process is getting segregated, and then there's an individual assigned to it. So as you can see over here, there is a materials manager who is receiving the invoice and the goods, making sure everything looks accurate, verifies the packing slip, and then pushes the invoice into the system. Then it goes through a MedHQ AP either, or a center BOM who makes sure everything looks accurate, the GL coding is correct, the date description looks good, pushes it further, and goes to the administrator, thus, the final approval from the administrator, and gets pushed into the system intact. If you're not using a third-party software, and if we are handling your MedHQ, AP, then it would be us. So we would be entering the invoice into the system, making sure that everything looks correct from like the dates and the GL coding and the description, and then pushing it further, making sure one more time being approved by the administrator. In between all this, if it's a new vendor, like we discussed before, we want to make sure that those new vendors are added into the system only if it has been authorized by an administrator or hospital personnel. Then going further, when you want to make payments for all these invoices, which is the next step in the process, we want to make sure the selection, the payment, and finally, the sending of the checks is all segregated between different people. So if a BOM is selecting, an administrator is approving, and MedHQ is sending the checks, then it makes sure that different individuals are responsible for different activities, thus having an adequate internal control. In the same scenario, if there's an administrator selecting, then there would be someone from either the hospital or a doctor that would be reviewing, and then MedHQ sending off the payments. So we want to make sure that there's like enough transparency in the process. There's legit invoices in the system that are being paid. This process ensures, and then there's enough clarity between everyone on who is doing what.
And Positive Pay is an automated cash management service designed to prevent check fraud by matching checks issued against checks that are later presented for payment. It's a solution designed really by the financial institutions to help prevent fraud through check and also ACH transactions by proactively validating transaction details It ensures that only authorized payments are processed. The way that it works here at MedHQ is typically we will process a check run for you. And after we process that check run, we will run a report that pulls specific information from that check run. It'll be the check date, the check number, the payee, and the dollar amount. Those factors are then loaded in a report and it's uploaded to the financial institution site. Later, when a check is presented for payment, there's basically an automatic cross verification that occurs, matching that report against the check presented. And the system will flag for any discrepancies, such as a mismatch in those four components. In addition to positive pay for checks, there's also positive pay for ACH transactions. And this is going to vary depending on your bank or financial institution, and also just the type of electronic payment itself. But typically, you're going to specify rules or filters and also specific company IDs. And ACH payments are only allowed to be made to those specific payees up to a certain dollar amount. So you do this process and say there's an issue during this cross-checking process. Something isn't matching with the check presented against that uploaded list that you've presented. An exception alert is prepared, and this is usually sent to the center as well as a representative at MedHQ. And it's typically our accounts payable coordinator along with the accounting manager. And you'll have time to go in and review and look at it and try to verify why this alert was sent. And basically, you'll need to either go ahead and accept it or reject it. But you just want to make sure you do in a timely fashion, because if you don't go in and review it and accept it, the check's going to get rejected and the check's going to get returned. We would, again, back to our internal control process that we demonstrated, we would suggest that the person selecting this check for payment not also be the person who is approving this exception. Again, just segregation of duties. In our opinion, positive pay just has so many great benefits. It offers enhanced security. It's proactive fraud prevention. It demonstrates operational efficiency, and we really suggest that our clients set this up with their banking institutions. Often the cost of this may be included in your monthly fees, or it may be available at a small additional cost.
All right. So, what happens when a fraud actually occurs? So, these are some of the ways we've identified how we can help our clients respond to any fraud activity. Foremost is gathering evidence. We want to make sure that we have sufficient information to provide to our authorities and bank, to even insurance. We want to make sure that we identify the source of the problem and how we can mitigate and stop it from happening again. So it begins with gathering evidence in any scenario. Next would be contacting the bank. Bank is definitely the first level response. It would, help you identify any other suspicious activity that might be happening in your account. It can prevent those fraudulent activities. They also have channels through which they can, either reverse or reimburse you if fraud is happening, and if you inform them within a certain time frame. You can also file a report or a claim with FTC, and all of our clients, some of them have actually done that as well, and they've had results. So it can help you identify the people who are associated with such crimes, even help you get your money back in some situations. You can obviously file an insurance claim if you happen to have that insurance. Companies have gotten reimbursed back for their losses. And like as mentioned before, it covers financial loss. And depending on the policy, some of them also provide restoration expenses. Then would be contacting either your legal attorney. Some clients have sought legal advice in the matter. It's just an additional layer of service available to you. All right. That brings us to the end of the webinar.
Oh, Dara, I do see one question though, if you want to answer this before we wrap up.
Sure.
We have a small staff and are concerned with being able to adequately separate duties. What do you suggest?
Yeah, that happens with our clients all the time, where, they have just an administrator who is reviewing, receiving, even approving the bills, and then, same person paying the bills as well. So for those centers, try to establish an AP workflow that works well, which has enough segregation of duties. So we ask either an affiliated hospital, if they have one, or a doctor at the center who would be approving the payments, just so that we have an additional person involved in the process at the center, and nobody's taking advantage of the system. And like I mentioned before, when we enter new vendors, we ask that someone from the organization authorizes adding a new vendor into the system. And this is also an extra step. We verify that we have a W-9 for those vendors. So when we make the payment, it is an extra check that we have in place. So we try to accommodate and work around our client needs, and but also have adequate internal control in the policy. All right. I see one more question, Julie. Do you want to take this one?
Sure.
Have you ever encountered any fraud-related activity at any of your centers, and how did you resolve it?
Sure. I will say we have experienced both check fraud and ACH fraud. The centers that had positive pay, there were little to no problems. The fraud was discovered immediately, and just the check, so the checks never cleared, and there was no loss sustained. We did have incidences of centers that didn't have positive pay. One center in particularly, they filed a police report. The banks acted appropriately, and the funds were returned. So there was very little, there was no loss there. We had another center that experienced ACH fraud, where someone had gained access to their bank information and was basically making just transfers. And with that one, I think there was a little persistence and a little work that needed to be done, but ultimately the banks did step up, and so they were able to recover their losses. A third example was another center that did not have positive pay, and they experienced a significant loss, and they didn't file a police report. Their financial institution, their banks, the other bank that was involved were somewhat unresponsive, and they were only able to really recoup a fraction of their loss. And this was through eventually a little bit through the financial institution and a little bit through private insurance. So again, it just really demonstrates the important capabilities of positive pay.
True. Great examples. All right, that is all for today. Thank you for listening to our webinar. Julie and my contact information are on the screen. Please reach out to us if you have any questions. Thank you.